Hello and welcome to Bread and Rosaries, the leftist Christian podcast that had a wonderful time at the Liberation Theology Gathering. Alright, and then just to cover all eventualities, hello and welcome to Bread and Rosaries, the leftist Christian podcast that can only apologise again for what happened at the Liberation Theology Gathering. I'm Ben Molyneux Hetherington, and I'm joined by Adam Spears. Hello, Adam.
Hey, you're right. That's the first time we've ever recorded two openings.
Yeah, well, now you've ruined it. Now you've acknowledged it. I was just going to drop whichever one was appropriate, and I think that covers all eventualities. I think we're covered there.
I think people need to know, you know.
Is this a matter of truth, a principle?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hopefully, we had a lovely time at the Liberation Theology podcast. Nope, that's a different thing, which is also great. But the Liberation Theology Gathering, because of how recording things works, we haven't been there yet, but by the time you hear this, we will have done. So, yeah.
It was great, it was a lovely time. Man. It was great. Yeah. I loved it, yeah.
Yeah. So, we are going to do a little follow-up from an episode that we released, I think, 2 years ago, which is crazy.
2 years ago?
No, I'm lying to you. It was only 1 year ago, or a little over a year ago. But that made me check. We've actually been doing this podcast for 3 years now.
Lies. That ain't true.
And if you were to do some quick maths on the amount of episodes that we've released in that period, well, for a start, it wouldn't add up to the number of episodes you can actually find now, because there was a whole rigmarole of things that went on, including the fact that for a long time our episode numbering conventions were completely out of whack.
I liked that. I enjoyed the weird episode numbering. I can't believe you got rid of it.
You wouldn't believe the number of people who genuinely said to me, where is episode 2 and 3? And I had to be like, well, they never actually existed. We recorded episode 4 before them, and then never got round to recording them. So episode 4 was actually the second. It just got confusing. Are we
still planning on going back to record episode 2 and 3?
Yeah, probably in sometime in 2025.
What were they? I've got no idea what
do you know what? That's a great question. I'd have to look probably back into our messages some distance to find out. And I can't remember why we decided that we wanted to record or release them before
a podcast. Full stop, or
well, yes. Don't think about that. It's best not to indulge those sorts of thoughts, you know. But we are going to do a little bit of a sequel to that episode. In that episode, we talked about why we were still going to bother with Christianity. Adam, are you still bothering with Christianity?
Just about.
Yeah, I would say just about as good as I'm prepared to offer as well. But we've kept it for a year or so. This time, we're going to talk about why bother with politics, I suppose, in the broadest sense. And then maybe at the end we'll make a decision about what we find harder to continue to bother with, Christianity or politics, if that's not too difficult a question, or at least what we find less depressing.
Yeah, and also I will probably pick you up on the idea that they are things that you could separate out. Before
any of that, we want to start with what else is on my mind, grapes.
What else is on my mind, grapes?
And for us, as for so many people, what is on our mind, grapes, at the minute is the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. We had a bit of a long conversation about how we wanted to address this. We felt very strongly that we needed to address what was happening, but that we also didn't want to talk shit, basically, because there is so much lies, nonsense, propaganda being spewed, particularly, if you happen to, open a newspaper or flick on a radio. And we didn't want to add to, poorly thought through opinions that are the misinformation. So we aren't going to spend the whole episode, although we could easily do a episode, 3 episodes, 10 episodes, going through all the stuff that's going on. But we did want to, first and foremost, go on record. And I haven't actually checked with everyone, but I think I'm going to say for the whole podcast, war crimes are bad, no matter who commits them. And that right now we are looking at the very serious possibility of a genocide in Gaza of Palestinians. And that...
Can I just interject there?
Yeah.
It's not a very real possibility. It's happening. It's already happening.
Yeah, you're right. There is currently a genocide in progress. Genocidal language is being used by Israeli senior politicians.
By British senior politicians.
Well, yeah, and...
Sorry, I'm really pissed off about this. So, I'm just ready to go. Yeah.
And we could, both of us, I think, just go on this. So what we want to say first and foremost is whatever we can do, whatever small part you, the listener, we as podcast, we as individuals, whatever, can do to work against the genocide of the Palestinian people, we should do. And yeah, as much as anything, we want to acknowledge that whatever might have led us to this point, maybe we'll talk about that and maybe we won't, but whatever things have happened in the past, nothing justifies genocide, nothing justifies war crimes. It is Tuesday, the 17th of October, as we record this. Minutes before we sat down to start, I saw footage of a hospital being bombed in Gaza. That's a war crime. That is one of many war crimes that we have sat and watched happen.
6 people died in a school bombing today.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's appalling. And whatever you might say about the violence that led to this point, and Hamas and Palestinian violence, it is clearly of a completely different scale to what is happening or what is being perpetrated by the Israeli government. And importantly, we, the West, Europe and the Americas, are in support of what Israel are doing. We are not just rhetorically in their support, we have provided weaponry, expertise, and diplomatic cover for them to commit war crimes and acts of genocide. So actually, as British people, it's our government that we maybe possibly might have something to say about or some sort of influence on, and they aren't supporting Hamas or any Palestinian violence. They are currently supporting Israeli war crimes.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that when you support war crimes, and it's probably actually just worth outlining what some of these war crimes are, why they are war crimes. At the very least, we can see that Israel is in contravention of Articles 33, 49 and 54 of the Geneva Convention, which are about collective punishment, forcible transfer of civilian populations, and safeguarding items vital for the survival of civilian populations. Israel has completely, just clearly doesn't give a damn about any of those things. And British and American and French and loads of other Western politicians and political leaders have been pretty unequivocal in their support of Israel, and not just their support of Israel, but Israel's right to do these things. Right now, it's possible we might be about to see a rollback on some of that from Biden in particular. By the time this podcast comes out, we will know. But already, our politicians have offered vocal support, and not just vocal support, but material support as well. They've sent over Marines and ships and all these kinds of things to support Israel's efforts here, to put it gently. When you support people doing war crimes and crimes against humanity, right, you share in that culpability. Right, like that the Geneva Convention is pretty clear about that, right? So what we should be seeing at the end of this is Biden, Macron, Sunak, even people like Starmer at The Hague. Frankly, that's what we should be seeing. And I know that sounds extreme, and obviously that's never going to happen because the International Criminal Court is never going to indict any of these people. But they should all be standing trial with Netanyahu, with the vast majority of Israeli politicians. And I was watching Rishi Sunak's address to Parliament on this issue yesterday, stupidly. And it was just incredible to me how many of these MPs from all sides were basically completely in favour of what was going on. And what I found especially, it just sickened me, was Keir Starmer's, now you're going to accuse me of being a tone policer here, I think, but not Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak's tone when the very few MPs asked the most sort of, gently kind of questioning kind of things, about the rhetoric that was coming out. When someone like Richard Bergen said something, and I'm always qualifying it with, Hamas are bad and what they've done is bad, etc., etc. But so often, Rishi Sunak's response would start with, I would just gently caution the right honourable, the honourable member to, be careful about their language, or to read what I've said, and as if they're the ones saying something that is just unconscionable rather than him, right? And it's like, mate, you are literally supporting war crimes here. We're almost at 4,000 people in Gaza dead now, right? Because they are indiscriminately carpet bombing the fucking place, right? And you've got the gall to act as if people who are questioning that are in some way, awful or on the wrong side. It's just incredible to me.
And people might note that we're avoiding doing the whole, of course we condemn Hamas or blah, blah thing. That's a very purposeful decision on my behalf. There is a really good article by Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek economist and politician, who has been on a lot of different shows, like political talk shows or whatever, and has repeatedly refused to condemn Hamas, and actually makes the point that he's also repeatedly refused to condemn Israel. And what he says is, as a European, my interest is condemning the governments of Europe and the North American governments that support, encourage, and allow Israel to act this way. We, as a nation in the UK and, the EU and, basically the entire Western world, have a long history of supporting Israel to turn Gaza into an open-air prison that is absolutely nightmarish to live in, and that it is impossible to leave without putting yourself in danger of being killed. So actually, the stuff that we're seeing happen, we don't want it to happen necessarily, but it is the sort of stuff that happens when you do that. So the condemnation for those of us in the West should be reserved for our own governments who have purposefully and knowingly created these conditions which will lead to abhorrent violence. We know that is what's going to happen when you do stuff like this. So ultimately, we're going to talk a lot more about our governments and their failings and the way that they uphold an apartheid state in Israel and support Israel to continually break the Geneva Convention, because it is those conditions that our governments have created that have led to the horrible violence that we're seeing now, and rhetorical defences that serve just to cover your own arse of Hamas or whoever else. That's not really the point. Who gives a shit if I condemn Hamas? They don't. I don't have any power. I this podcast does not donate any money to Hamas. It's
trying to derail your point. That's all it is. That's all it is. We all fucking condemn Hamas, right? All right, there are a few who don't, but basically, no one with a brainstem doesn't condemn Hamas, right? We shouldn't have to caveat what we're about to say about Israel committing fucking war crimes, right, by saying, and of course what Hamas did was terrible. Yes, of course what Hamas did was terrible. Now can we talk about the thousands of people being bombed to death? Can we talk about the people who have had their water, their electricity, their fucking access to medicine and food cut off by Israel? Can we talk about that without having to equivocate and talk about how Hamas are bad? Of course they're bad.
I don't know if you've noticed this. It's really been driven home by the fact that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak had essentially the same take on Israel-Palestine, which was, hey, if they want to do war crimes, all we can do is support them. But obviously, you've recently had the two party conferences, and probably the Lib Dems at some point, but who knows, who cares. But the major party conferences happened, and the essential difference was that, it was an important difference. They were different because, Rishi Sunak is a bit of a muddle, right? He doesn't know what's going on, but Keir Starmer's all confident. And
I'm sorry.
There was a protester.
I'm just laughing because I've been laughing for the last 30 seconds because I'm genuinely trying to think if I saw any coverage of the Lib Dem conference. Because all the conferences do happen at the same time. That's why
it must have happened, right?
Yeah. I don't
Presumably.
think I've heard anything about it.
No.
Well, once again on this podcast, we reiterate the fact that we have less respect for the Lib Dems than we do for the Tories. Frankly for UKIP.
Honesty goes a long way. So, the question on the table is, why bother with politics? And as you've just probably worked out from that rant...
We shouldn't. We're done. Bye.
That at least national electoral politics is not looking particularly rosy right now. We're due an election in the next 18 months or something, aren't we? Next year at some point? I think. Something like that.
I think, yeah.
I think in all probability I won't vote.
Depends who's on the ballot, to be honest. My hometown had a communist in the last... I don't know what party they were for, to be honest. So I don't
At this point, I would probably vote for anyone who was refugees are good and we should let more in, and trans rights are human rights.
Oh, well, good luck finding a party that believes that.
Yeah, as I say. Unfortunately, that leaves me with precisely zero options. But
to be fair, Ben.
Yeah.
The Lib Dems are pretty consistent on those two things.
Are they?
I think they would U-turn on it pretty quickly if it served their electoral chances. Because they like a U-turn, don't they?
It's worth pointing out that those are fundamentally liberal demands that I've just outlined there. That's not me being a bitter leftist. I'm asking for a party with a consistent liberalism.
Look, nobody on this podcast is wanting to vote in the revolution. I don't think that's that'd be great if it could happen, but we are so far from that at this point that the best we can hope for is that people aren't nasty to the most vulnerable people in our society.
So national politics makes us very angry and very sad, and we don't see a lot of hope there. So perhaps we need to work out why exactly it's worth continuing to bother with thinking and talking about politics and maybe even taking political action. So I want to ask you the question, Adam. Is it still worth bothering with thinking about politics, talking about politics, and maybe even doing political work despite it all?
I don't even know if the question makes sense to me because I just don't think we have a choice, right? Is it worth it? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But politics, permeates our society at every level. So we've got no choice in whether we do politics. The Green Party, before they became, they're not all TERFs, but before they had a significant minority of TERFs in it, used to have this phrase that they used that basically you either do politics or you're done by politics, you know? And I think that's true, because politics, both parliamentary, electoral and otherwise, affects all of us. So either we can engage in it and try and change things and, even if that's in small ways on the ground, or we can just sit back and let it be done to us.
That's true, but I suppose there is the option, and you see plenty of people do it, which is to lapse into a kind of ignorant political quietism, right? And I could do it quite easily. I would say, if I was being rigorously self-critical, that I read and talk and think about politics a lot, but of late I haven't really done much politically, whatever that might mean or look like. So I guess why don't we both just lapse into political quietism and go, well, I'm all right, Jack?
Because we care. Like, and I mean that seriously. Like, that's a genuine thing. Like, if you care about people, which you should, you have to do politics. And I think, you know, that's where we're hopefully informed positively by our faith as well, right? Our faith is one that, you know, I think fairly clearly argues that we should care about people, that we should care about people who are, you know, experiencing life in ways that make it difficult to live it. And the only way to deal with that stuff is by doing politics. So if you care, you know, if you actually give a damn about people, you've got to do it, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. I do think there's maybe an element as well of like depoliticized trans people, for example. That's not a people group that really exists in great measure, not because trans people are inherently more likely to be political, but because their very lives have been deeply politicized in horrible and unpleasant ways. And so I think both for those of us who experience one form of oppression or another, that is, you know, we are already on the front lines. But I think it's also, as you said about caring for people, like the trans people in my family and trans friends that I have, they do not get a choice about being on the front line of a political battle simply by being themselves. And that is the same, obviously, for queer communities and black communities and all sorts of other, you know, people that are forced onto the front line of political battles that they didn't choose themselves. And, you know, we talk about solidarity, but that to me is what solidarity is about, is choosing to stand alongside these people who didn't get a choice about being on the front line of politics.
Jesus weeps for Gaza. He sees the pain and suffering of the 1.9 million people who have been forced to leave their homes without access to nutritious food, clean water, decent shelter. He hears the cries of the 25,000 orphaned children. He is with all who mourn the 250 people killed every single day. Christians for Palestine UK is a group of Christians who are calling for an immediate ceasefire in Palestine. We don't pretend to have all the answers, but are united in our prayers, hope and action for equality, peace and justice for all the peoples of the Holy Land. Together, we are organising a Christian presence at the National Marches for Palestine and local days of action, where we've been joined by siblings from Sabeel Kairos, Pax Christi, and a whole range of Christian churches. We urge you to join us to act in solidarity with the people of Palestine and call for a permanent ceasefire and just peace. The Very Reverend Canon Richard Sewell, Dean of St George's College in Jerusalem, says, "I warmly welcome the newly formed group, Christians for Palestine UK. Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank need to see the solidarity of Christians in the UK, and they will be encouraged to see your commitment to stand up for them in their time of terrible suffering." To find details of local actions or to join the Christian bloc at a national march, follow Christians for Palestine UK on Instagram and Facebook, or email christiansforpalestineuk@gmail.com. Join us as we call for a ceasefire now.
Yeah, and I think that's actually especially important right now, you know, because we are seeing more and more we're seeing people radicalized to the right by things like the YouTube algorithm.
Just quickly, I mean, maybe this is well established, right? But it is absolutely insane, the YouTube algorithm. Like, as someone who uses YouTube to watch live concert videos and rugby highlights, it is amazing if I leave my YouTube unchecked, just auto-playing, how quickly fascism pops up. Like, it should just be playing me other rugby highlights and other music videos, but instead, it's 2 or 3 autoplays, and then Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate or whoever the fuck pops up. This is a complete aside, but it is mind-boggling to me. And if you're someone who's maybe slightly more vulnerable to those arguments, that's really worrying how quickly you can just be in a far-right rabbit hole just by looking up normal stuff on YouTube.
Yeah, ultimately, if you haven't, managed to gain or be given the tools to interpret different forms of information, you are vulnerable to this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally derailed your point you were going to make, though, about it's super important right now to show solidarity.
It is, yeah. We are seeing a massive increase in this stuff. We're seeing governments around the world, including in the UK, really just leaning hard into this stuff. The anti-immigrant rhetoric that we have, had imposed on us again, the transphobia that we've got going on again. I'm seeing people who, 5 years ago wouldn't have dreamed of being transphobic, who were inclusive, basically people whose intuition is to be good to people, who are, being radicalized and end up playing into and agreeing with this awful transphobia that's going on. And so it's more important than ever that actually those of us who don't agree with this, those of us who actually want to stand in solidarity with some of the most oppressed people in our communities, it's really important that we don't drop the ball on this, that we carry on, that we speak up.
Shall we talk about a Saint of the Week?
Saint of the Week.
Go on in.
I have a Saint of the Week for you, Adam. Her name is Thea Bowman.
Might be worth saying that the Magnificast talked about Thea Bowman a lot a month or 2 ago.
Did they?
Yep.
Is that where I got the idea from? I'm sure it wasn't. I wouldn't just steal from them. I'm always really careful to avoid talking about stuff that they talk about, but I've completely missed that. I can't.
It doesn't matter.
I think I was Googling around to try and find a
likely story.
So Thea Bowman is born in 1937 in Mississippi. She is black. Her grandfather was a slave. She's born into a Methodist family, and it's a real shame Johnny isn't here, because then I'd get to say that Bowman actually repented and returned to the true faith of the Catholic Church rather than the shoddy Methodists. So the words first African American to are going to come up a lot in this. So she might be the first African American to be made a saint. And as you say, she's currently the servant of God, which is step 1 if you're on your way to being a saint.
Can I just say, the whole, the steps that are in the whole Catholic canonization process always just make me laugh. It just seems so, I don't know. I just love the idea that they're kind of justifying how they're doing this with the whole kind of I give you the keys to the kingdom, whatever is you bind here on earth is bound in heaven. And they're kind of using that idea to be we've invented all of these steps to sainthood, and once you've reached this bit, then you can progress onto this. And in heaven, God and the angels are just going, excellent, yes, they progressed onto step 2. Now they're actually servant of God. And
On one level, you do have to appreciate the honesty of just being look, this isn't really from God, but we've made it up and we think it's cool, so we're going to stick with it.
I mean, I'm not down on the whole thing. I think it's fun. It's just I'm not necessarily sure how much truck I actually pay to it. But
I mean, in the list of things that the Catholics have invented, this is one of the more positive ones.
Well, yes, except that when you look at the kinds of people that have also been sainted, people who have been sainted before people like Thea Bowman have been sainted, maybe that might be evidence of that not being quite so good.
Okay, that's a fair point. I'll accept that. Let's move on to focus on Thea Bowman. She was the first African American to become a nun in La Crosse community of Franciscans. So she never officially raised any complaints about that community, but she did apparently talk to other black nuns about some of her experiences there and how she felt that she was treated differently sometimes because she was black. But she did ultimately stay a member of that community until her death. She was involved in the civil rights movement, and she was quite heavily involved in campaigning for the kind of great involvement of black Catholics in the church. I really like something. She was apparently a big hater on the metaphor of the church as a melting pot. And she preferred to say that the church is a salad, one whole dish made up of individual and different ingredients, which I really like.
The thing is, I get it. I'm just entirely put off that because salad is disgusting.
What about fruit salad?
Too crunchy.
Okay.
I'm just very autistic about
I hear that
about fruit and veg,
Yeah, and I'm not going to disagree with you at all. But on a metaphorical level, it's better than the melting pot. So she helped found the National Black Sisters Conference, which supported black Catholic nuns, and she would often wear kind of clothes drawing on African styles. And she wanted there to be a more variety of music in Catholic churches, so the inclusion of black spiritual music. Something that I think is always underemphasized when people tell her stories. She was actually an academic, so she had a PhD. She taught at universities, and she was kind of an expert on Thomas More. So there's something quite interesting there, I think, about even in celebration, the things that are celebrated about her as a black woman are her peacemaking, her outspokenness, her embrace of different colours and different ideas, but not her academic talents and gifts. And I think that's, even when a black woman is celebrated, you do see that kind of those racist undertones and what isn't included in that story. As I say, she was famous for her peacemaking. She was big on kind of interracial dialogue. There's a quote of hers: "I can introduce my black friends to my Hispanic friends, to my Anglo friends, to my Asian friends, to my native friends. I can be the bridge over troubled waters. I can take you by the hand and take you with me into black community. I can walk with you into your community. And if I walk into your community, I don't walk as a stranger. I walk as your sister." And to round it off, in 1989, she had terminal cancer. She was using a wheelchair. She was really very ill, but she became the first African-American woman to address the US Bishops' Conference. And her speech did not pull any punches, criticised the church for its lack of inclusion and the patronising attitude it took towards black people. And then there's this brilliant quote that I'm going to read in full from it, where she says, "What does it mean to be black and Catholic? It means I come to my church fully functioning. That doesn't frighten you, does it? I bring myself, my black self, all that I am, all that I have, all that I hope to become. I bring my whole history, my traditions, my experience, my culture, my African-American song and dance and gesture and movement as teaching and preaching and healing and responsibility as a gift to the church." And then she finished by getting all the bishops to join hands and sing "We Shall Overcome," which is this kind of black spiritual that it was really notable to get a group of predominantly, possibly completely, but definitely predominantly white bishops to sing together while holding hands was her kind of final act of bringing this very black form of spirituality right to the centre of the Catholic Church in America. And so, yeah, that's my saint of the week, Thea Bowman.
I love it when you get these people who are invited to go and speak somewhere and just lay it on the people that have invited them there.
The sort of speakers that go with the aim of not being invited back.
Yes, exactly.
So, in talking about why we both bother, we've talked about the ideas of solidarity, the ideas that you don't always get a choice about whether you're involved in politics, and the idea of caring for people, and that politics being a way of caring for people. What we haven't notably talked about, given the subject of this podcast, is religion, which you might have heard of. So I'm really reluctant to... There's a danger in talking about religious motivations and saying, well, as a Christian, I feel called to not be a dick, because there's always this danger that what you're applying is, yeah, actually being a Christian gives me kind of a monopoly on not being a dick. So I do want to be quite careful.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could say the evidence kind of fairly immediately shows that to be what it is.
Yes. So I don't think this is like an exclusionary thing, but I do think there is, as people who find ourselves willingly or otherwise in the Christian faith, we are inevitably going to find some of that motivation for politics within that. And something I find fascinating is that as a former evangelical, the idea that we should be involved in politics was something that was quite big in my particular evangelical upbringing. Mm-hmm. And obviously, there's the American ideas, which are basically, you should go and be a Republican governor. That's what God is calling you to. Which, I don't know, they're more complicated than that. And I don't want to speak about what I don't know, but, there's that cliche of American Christian political involvement. And what you get in this country is a subtler, and I think sometimes no less dangerous, but a subtler form of this, which says it's just really good to have Christian voices in politics.
Oh man, it's like I'm back 20 years ago.
And actually, whilst there are some insidious implications to that, the idea that a commitment to Christianity involves a commitment to some sort of political action is one of the few consistent ideas that I have kind of attained throughout that journey. And, I don't know, there are times that makes me a little bit suspicious of that impulse, but that was something that I always grew up with, was the idea that as Christians, we were called to some sort of political involvement. Obviously, sometimes that kind of was like, which means basically remembering to vote, maybe even in local elections as well. But, still that the core idea of to be Christian is to act or feel called to act politically in the world. And I think whilst I would want to reconfigure that, I think I still believe that to some extent.
Yes, I don't think it's entirely wrong. I think, by the way, what it reminds me of a little bit actually is kind of entryism. How you've got this idea of people like en masse, kind of usurping a political party from within, right? Turning it into something else.
During the Corbyn years, it was the Trotskyite entryist, right? It was the scary figure that was going to destroy the Labour Party, right?
Yeah, which is interesting because, like, the Labour Party has always had its problems for sure, but Trotskyists were there from the start.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so the idea that they were, I suppose in a sense, because they'd been expelled in like the 80s, that, they were in some sense entryists again, but they had always been there.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because it's not, one of the interesting things about the way we see this in sort of evangelical churches, I think, is it's not that there's an idea that, a good Christian joins any one particular political party. It's exactly that they can join basically any of them, and that's just a good thing because we're getting Christians in high places, influencing policy. And that's fascinating because that's one of those key ways that, as you say, it differs certainly from American sort of Christian approaches, evangelical Christian approaches to sort of electoral politics.
Yeah, and what you don't have to the same extent, for all of the jokes about the Church of England being the Conservative Party at prayer, there is not the same political affiliation by religious denomination. Even within
which, by the way, actually goes to show just how little difference there is and has been for decades between the main political parties, right? And we can see that we spoke about it in an episode a while ago now, where we talked about the prayer breakfast that sort of migrated from the US to the UK, and organizations like what's the parliamentary organization that's like Christians in Parliament or something. And they kind of see their existence in these spaces as just an inherently good thing.
Yeah.
And that's both fascinating and weird, but also, as you say, quite dangerous, I think, as well.
And there's more than a hint of the logic of colonialism around that, I would suggest.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But we've been classic leftists, and when we try to talk about the positive side of something, we immediately talked about why the bad stuff's happened. There were definitely critiques there, and I wouldn't want to state it that way quite as directly, and certainly I do not believe that having more Christians in politics is going to lead to anything good inherently. I would vote for an atheist, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever else.
Wow, how many religions does this person have?
Well, I don't know.
Is it like the Futurama thing where it's like all the religions have come together and you've just got like the minister there who's got every symbol on their hat?
But yeah, I'd vote for a leftist of any religious persuasion over a right-wing Christian, even if they believed everything that I believe theologically, which they don't because they're right-wing.
I mean, I would caveat that though, because there are people who we might call leftist who I wouldn't vote for in the same way that I wouldn't vote for a right-wing Christian, right? Like if anyone from the SWP is on the ballot, like I ain't voting for him.
Yes. And again, we're getting caught in the trap of talking about voting because it's a useful shorthand, but we're not really talking about voting. I'm in favour of a coalitional politics around left-wing principles that will include people of all different backgrounds, ethnicities and religious affiliations.
Look, at the end of the day, fuck electoral politics, burn it to the ground. But I will vote for, someone who's a decent socialist, communist, if they're standing in my area.
So all of that to say, I have no particular interest in saying we need more Christians in politics or that Christianity's particular war in politics is any good, but that for me as a Christian, part of my faith and the way it orients me in the world leads me unavoidably to political action. And in some ways, I have been reflecting recently on because this is the sort of stuff I think about on what it means to be a Christian as not just an identity, but an active choice in the way you live your life. And in some ways, particularly as someone who is not currently affiliated to any formal Christian community, the question of religious identity is a slightly thornier one when you're not part of a community and you pretty much outright reject quite a lot of the mainstream forms of established or, institutional church exist. And I feel less Christian, less like I am living a life worthy of that name, because I have of late not been engaging in any sort of political action. Because for me, actually, for my faith to be a thing that is real, it's something that I put into practice. And what that looks like, in part, not in totality, but in part, is through political action. So it is not just that my faith motivates me, it's more integral to that to take part in the political work is part of what it means to be a Christian for me.
One of the things that makes me think about is the fact that there's this overlap between politics and religion that for you is about, being motivated to act politically in the world. But actually, I think there's a broader way of looking at this and a parallel actually between the very concepts of religion and politics, because there are distinct, specific moments or sort of periods of time for both the concept of politics and the concept of religion, right? Where they as concepts have come into being, right? There was a time when politics and religion weren't even really categories. Like, people didn't think in those terms because
the fall hadn't happened yet.
Because
right, that's what you're saying. Genesis 3 is when this happens.
Yeah. I'm not sure you've really turned your back entirely on your evangelical past. But no, I mean, this is something that people don't always realize is that, we'll start with the concept of religion. Like, the idea of religion being what we think of it today is a very recent thing, really. There was a time when, you just, in the UK at least, you were a Christian because, like, that's what you were. That's what everyone is. Like this, it's just in the water. Like, it's not. You're not saying my religion is Christianity, your religion is Islam. You have no religion, right? Like, you didn't think that way. And the same goes with politics as well. And you can see that, for example, in the Bible, right? Like, the Bible is political. It's a political sort of set of books because politics was just in everything, in the same way that politics is in everything and runs through everything today. But we forget that because we imagine politics to be about electoralism and that kind of thing, right? But actually, there was no distinction between religion, politics, and just existence in first century Palestine, in most times and places in history. That's something that we do well to remember, because yes, on some level, we're making decisions about how we engage with those things. But actually, again, they happen with or without us knowing that they're happening. As you sort of said earlier, or alluded to earlier, that there's actually a danger in that, right? Because you can take that sort of approach of we've talked about certain evangelical Christians taking the approach of, well, it's good that Christians get into politics and get into high places, right? So, like, yes, there is a danger to that as well. But ultimately, as you said earlier as well, that belief kind of hasn't entirely left you, and it hasn't left me either. I am also interested in politics and religion. Those things I can't, sometimes people ask me about those things in ways that sort of imply that they are separate things, or they say things like religion doesn't belong in politics. And I'm like, how do you want me to differentiate between those things? Right? How do you want me to completely shut off a core part of myself as if it doesn't relate to how I think in this other area as well? And I just don't think that can be done.
I think some people will talk about, my religion motivates my politics, and place their religion as kind of the primary driver of things. And certainly in my experience, and in some ways that's all we can talk about, right? We're talking about how our own psychology functions around this stuff, and whilst that is deeply influenced by the structures around us, ultimately that is a personal experience. But for me, I certainly couldn't draw that cleaner distinction between my religious faith and my, I guess, political faith, if you want to use those sorts of terms. It's not as simple as, well, I have my deeply held theological beliefs, and they then lead me to have these political beliefs that are kind of second-order beliefs that stem from that. Actually, they're hand in hand to the extent that, whilst there is some tension there, that tension is not simply resolved by saying, well, religion wins, but that I allow my religion to conflict and critique my politics, but I allow my politics to also critique my religious faith, right? And I take very seriously that whilst I believe it is possible to be a leftist, to be a Marxist, while retaining a religious faith, I take very seriously that Marxism is fundamentally atheist in its outlook and includes a lot of important criticism of particularly Christianity, particularly Protestant Christianity. I don't simply go, well, he's saying that's bad forms of Christianity. I do, to some extent, let those political ideas, I don't know, like, they find ways to fit together with my religious faith, but I don't simply go, well, that's fine, my religious faith is more important, so I'll lay it over the top. Like, I let that uncomfortableness and that critique of my religion in as well, if that makes any sense.
I think that's an important way of looking at this, but I think one key way in which I would disagree with you is actually that I think what you're doing there is you're not differentiating Marxism from Marx, right? And Marxism now is a tradition that goes beyond Marx.
Sure.
Right? Like, obviously Marx is super important, right? But but Marxism, even Marx differentiated between Marx and Marxism. And I think that's a really important part of it to remember as well.
And I would agree, but I would kind of say that, I guess, when I read Marx on religion, I find him to be pretty right most of the time, and that is, I could go, well, yes, but he's talking about the bad sort of religion that doesn't really belong to me. I could go, no, he's wrong about that. Actually, religion is the most important thing, and Christianity, is the trump card. But neither of those approaches, both of those ultimately involve separating things more than I want them to. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's more nuanced than Marx seemed to think, and I think it's more nuanced than people who think they know Marx and disagree with Marx seem to think. It's important to remember that, Marx absolutely did have some very critical things to say about religion. He also had some things that people misunderstand about what he said about religion. But it's also important to recognize that within that critique and within his own approach to sort of revolutionary politics, he worked with Christians all the time. Because you had to, right? Like, there are loads of them around,
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I don't mean this to be like, well, Marx is right, so we should all be atheists. But simply to say that I refuse to take some of the easy ways out in drawing that distinction, and that I want to allow that political dimension to unsettle that religious dimension, and that the uneasy kind of peace I find with those, for whatever peace I might find with it, is the only intellectually honest approach that I can find.
I think that's fair, and I think that's a good approach. I think I'm just annoyed with so many people constantly, normally on social media, telling me that you can't be a Christian and be a communist. And I'm so fed up with having to explain to people who should know better, right, that communism is a far broader thing than just Marxism, that it's a far broader thing than Marxism-Leninism, and that actually there are plenty of ways in which Marxists and Christians end up kind of on the same page, and that it is possible to hold those two things, yes, in some level of tension, but actually also a lot of the time in agreement.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think possibly you have a slightly less a fraught relationship to faith than I do. I mean, most human beings do, to be fair. Like, I particularly, and that's not to say it's not fraught, or at least sometimes it's not. But I think, is that a fair?
Well, I'll tell you what it is for me. Right, my faith. People ask me why do you believe in God? Why are you a Christian? Anything like that. And my answer to that is not to go into some deep apologetics where once it might have been. It's to say, because I just do. I don't know any other way of being. I believe in God because I feel God, and I feel that in my core, right? And that's not a judgment on anyone else who doesn't. But to me, I've never, we hear a lot of the time Christians saying, well, doubt is just it's a key part of faith, an important part of faith. I doubt the church a lot of the time. I doubt Christianity a lot of the time. I don't think I ever really doubt God. And so I just sort of keep my mouth shut, because I know for a lot of people doubting God is, that is a really important part, and there's absolutely no judgment in me, from me for that. Like, that's super important for a lot of people, and I wish them well on that. But that's why it seems like I'm less fraught, I think, than you are sometimes, because my doubt is placed in institutions that are human made rather than God made. God, that was super spiritual, wasn't it?
I liked it. We got to the religious stuff.
That was almost Hillsong,
Yeah. So just to round us off on this, I want to get a little bit more practical after we've been all very spiritual, and kind of talk a little bit about what if we are dismissing for now the national electoral political scene, what forms of political action maybe do give us a sense of hope and possibility for the future that we might find ourselves getting involved in?
Well, I think there are some of the big ones that we always like to talk about on the left. Trade unionism is obviously a big one. Try and get involved in a good trade union. Personally, I'm a member of the IWW.
And I think on unions as well, it is worth saying that, yes, be a member, but also actually if you can and you're able to, particularly if your workplace is, organise one of the bigger unions, get trained as a rep, get involved. It's one of the, like the church, if you turn up and are willing to help, you will find yourself very quickly with a large amount of power to do some good. So actually it's not just joining a union, it's
getting involved. Yeah, but I would say as well is maintain, decide what boundaries you're going to have at the start, because it's very easy to get burnt out. Because as soon as you show you're willing, you will be shown what you can do. I think that's good. Tenants unions as well, like Acorn. Get involved with them. Even things like Food Not Bombs. I love Food Not Bombs. I was part of a Food Not Bombs group for a while. I think they're doing really good work, just sort of spreading information and feeding people. That's politics as well. And that's a very fundamental kind of grassroots form of politics.
And I think that's something I would definitely advocate for. I've been looking at trying to get involved in that down here, and I am going to try to. But actually, there's in every city and most decent-sized towns, there will be a group that feeds people with no expectation of anything in return other than to feed people, and sometimes to spread information, but sometimes just to feed people. And just the simple act of doing that, it's not just about feeding people. It's about, I don't know if you remember when we had Damon Garcia on a little while back, he talked about looting as removing items from the circle of exchange and taking them outside of the grips of capitalism, and simply feeding people for free with no expectation of anything in return other than giving them food, is actually inherently introduces a non-capitalist form of relating to each other, to the world, and to food, which I think is so important. So I would definitely, if there is something like that happening where you are, then that is something that, even if it doesn't feel that political, I think it's actually a really important form of political organising.
Yeah, and actually there are similar things going on in some churches as well, that, if you feel more comfortable in a church context, see if your church has a pantry. A lot of churches have pantries. The pantry system is, a really cool thing that I think brings a certain amount of dignity to people who are struggling. So I'd really encourage people to get involved in those. I think one other thing I would say is there are times when it might be helpful to engage with the kind of electoral political scene. And one of those times is right now. As we mentioned earlier in this episode, we have a political class in this country that is basically just giving carte blanche to Israel to commit these crimes, these war crimes, these crimes against humanity. And institutions like the International Criminal Court and that kind of thing are not going to hold these people to account, right? What is going on here is that a war crime like Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, Emily Thornberry, all of these people are participating in those war crimes by backing them up with their words, and in the case of the government, with military aid as well. We must hold these people to account, and this might be one of the few times when I'll advocate bothering to send an email or a letter to your MP. The more of us speak up about this, the harder it will be for them to get away with it. So I would encourage people to do that in this instance.
And we're going to link to a form letter that you can use, aren't we, in the show notes?
Yeah, we'll have a form letter linked that you can just put your name in, your address in, and your MP's name and address in, and just send it off. Easy as that.
And I would say kind of finally on this, that the other thing that I think is to look at solidarity campaigns in your area. I know the Cuban solidarity campaign has a number of things, but obviously right now the Palestinian solidarity movement is going to be a big focus, and they are
BDS as well.
And I was just going to say that actually we need to be super careful because they are increasingly trying to use lawfare against us to make left-wing activism illegal, and BDS is definitely a focus of that. But BDS is the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement that was started by Palestinian activists to boycott stuff that comes from the Israeli government, to encourage organizations to divest from anything involved in Israeli settlements, and ultimately for the international community to place sanctions on Israel for its ongoing war crimes. And I think that is going to be a movement that we increasingly need to focus on in the coming weeks and months as things seem to get worse in Israel, and that it is the most effective way we can oppose a far-right military influenced government in Israel, as it needs to be stopped from committing a permanent genocide. So, yeah, I think involve yourself in BDS as you can.
It's worth saying as well with BDS that we are seeing, as you say, more and more claims. And actually, I was watching the Parliament channel earlier today because I hate myself. And and a Tory MP, I can't remember who, stood up and was talking about BDS and said that they were a racist movement. BDS are not a racist movement, right? Like, it is the very same kind of activism, boycott, divestment, sanctions, that contributed to the global push to bring down the apartheid South African government, right? This kind of activism plays a key role in holding these kinds of governments to account. It's not a racist thing. What it is something that is arguably anti-Zionist, that is trying to hold Israel to account. And because people tend to conflate Israel with Jews, that's why people pretend that it's racist. It's not, and we should support it with every fibre of our being, frankly.
Yeah.
Especially at the moment.
Absolutely. And as always, they are so keen to paste it as racist to use legal means to stop it. That probably tells you that it's effective. We know it's effective because we used it already in South Africa. I mean, we
that's why they're pushing so hard to stop it, right?
It has been an effective tool before and could well be again. I think that does us for an episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for listening to the pair of us drone on. Please do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from people. You can go to our wonderful website, breadandrosaries.com, or look in the description to find contact details. We'd love to hear from people. We have a Patreon if you want to throw us some pennies to help support making the podcast. You will get some fun goodies if you do that. And also, if you don't have pennies to throw at us, apparently rating and reviewing us on the old Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from is really important. I believe we still have some goodies to send to anyone who does give us a review. So, do that as well. Adam, where in the world can people find you?
You can find me most places at Commie, Xian.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. And once again, I'm so sorry about what happened at the Liberation Theology Gathering. It won't happen again, and Chris will not be back on the podcast. Cool. Thanks, Adam, and thanks for listening, everyone. See you later.
See you later.